yours.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Jason. Good morning to United States. Good afternoon from Slovenia, from Ljubljana. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. The honor is all mine. I am humble. I'm not a politician. I'm a scientist. And this presentation was presented at the Russian Academy of Sciences. I hope that doesn't matter to you. And we were thinking, Professor Muller and I, we were, thinking about the crossroad between the digital ecosystems and natural ecosystems. We still don't know, or I don't know, if there is a one system digital or there are several. And but I am sure that the natural ecosystem is only one. And maybe just to adjust to the recent conversation right now, the West world didn't lose its soul. It just have to be reinvented. So next slide, please, Eva. Thank you. We are in searches for synthropies between the above a certain scale digital ecosystems and above a certain scale natural ecosystem as a philosophical discussion of inverse cybernetics. This is what I'm doing. I'm working hard, listening, learning. Next slide, please. What is the synthropy? We all know about the opposite situation, which is the second law of thermodynamics. But synthropy is the natural ability of many complex systems to spontaneously self-organize to an increasing level of internal orderliness. So goes beyond the entropy law. Natural systems always tend to become increasingly disorderly, tend to collapse, as we can see in 21st century when expected pandemic, because I'm a veterinarian I'm trained veterinarian, was absolutely expected. So, but we collapsed in 9 months, the humanity collapsed. For simple systems, the validity of entropy can be proved, but for complex systems, it cannot be proved. The synthesis of quantum physics and Tesla theories of how time behaves and polyphase system has made a very interesting discoveries. Next slide, please. In general, this is the quite interesting article from Baryam, Lynch, and Baryam. In general, any system without structure above a certain scale is unable to withstand structure arising above the scale. And I'm afraid that that's what really happened, in December last year, in 2019, and now when we are facing this horrible pandemic. They said that develop a characterization of multi-scale changes in the system. Of course, they were motivated by Shannon informatic theories, ideas of noise, but consider structure information. Authors, again, in this article, then related their findings to political anarchism, showing that society requires some organizing processes, even if there is no traditional government or of hierarchies. Next slide, please. Igor, next slide. No, just go back a little bit. Thank you. Thank you. I do apologize. One back, please.
One back.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Okay. No, now another one.
Now that one, right?
Okay, thank you. So we know about, about the second law of thermodynamics, but I'm thinking about inverse second law of thermodynamics, because finally authors of this article formulated their findings as an inverse second law of thermodynamics, while closed system collapse into disorder, systems open to a structured environment spontaneously generate order. That means, that is why I said minutes ago that I believe in reinvention. So we will really need to to open ourselves to a structured environment and spontaneously generate order. Next slide, please. So definition of term system, I was shocked quite a while ago when some of the eminents were claiming that system doesn't exist anymore, and at the same time we are talking about the system behavior, system thinking, system dynamic, etc., system almighty. So system exists, at least for me. And we have to talk about object versus system. So mathematically, system is contain components plus relation, plus content, mental, emotional picture of the object under consideration. As picture, system is introduced from and inside the author's selected view. That means from our selected view. Hence, it is not equal to the object under consideration, but it's. Next slide, please. Behavior is a natural attribute of existing object rather than its simplified picture, a system, which is even further simplified by modeling that is used for presentation, communication, tending to oversimplified conclusion as a basis of unrealistic actions, resulting often in errors and failures. Entropy tends to result from one-sidedness, so we are one-sided, not just me, all of us. Is the natural tendency of everything to disappear, becoming something else. So that is why we are talking about Professor Moulet's law of requisite holism, which is equally of law of requisite variety. And as important as law of requisite variety. Next slide, please. Success is easier to attain with application of Moulet's dialectical system theory, which is a mental synergy of all crucial and only crucial system viewpoints and related attributes of the object under consideration. The requisite variety cannot be attained without the requisite holism based on the dialectical system as a mental tool of creative interdisciplinary cooperation. Next slide, please. In the modern life, the natural and digital ecosystem exist either in parallel or in a synergetic relation. In the case of the search for synthropies between the natural ecosystem and digital ones, we, Professor Moulet and I, are addressing the scientific audience to describe, to observe, to participate, to decide and influence zeros, first, second, third, and fourth order of cybernetic, written by Bozicnik and Moulet in 2011, and help us solve the listed fundamental dilemmas, complexities. Actually, this endeavor of ours is reaching beyond abstractions, tend to be lapulatism, by asking a number of questions. In our extended abstracts, there are 11 questions, but I will tell you just two. For me, most important one. Next slide, please, Igor. Thank you very much. 11 questions. What's the truth? What's the post-truth? Where to look? So first question was, have digital ecosystems confessedly dynamic in their nature exceeded a certain scale, or is the natural ecosystem the one which reaches such feature and started to collapse at spot where the physical world merges with the virtual when boundaries are intangible? And 11 questions, does the natural ecosystem in interaction with digital ones encounter the feedback loop phenomenon or inverse twisted cybernetics? Next slide, please. Thank you. Yet the proposed architecture of such discussion issue should not be another, the inexplicable neglect of Alexander Bogdanov, the author of Technology. Next slide, please. This is the third order of cybernetic written by Professor Lepsky. Next slide, please. Now we are, Professor Moulet and I, we are calling for, from the vision to integration of natural social system, the universal dialectical system, a new fourth order cybernetics and sustainable future that could create a synergy of insight, observation, and action which matches inevitable requisite holism and whole. Leaving holism aside kills the very essence of cybernetics, gentlemen, and system theory, and erases them from curricula. System theory plus cybernetics, science of synergy by creative cooperation and interdependent and responsible specialists. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wow. What's the definition for synthropy?
Could I interject here?
Excuse me?
I would, with regard to this question, I would point out that the notion of synthropy, as far as I can determine, was introduced in 1944 by an Italian mathematician, and he derived the notion of synthropy as from mathematical considerations of thermodynamics, and he associated it with the first law of thermodynamics, not the second law. So
that's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. But we have another definition from the Slovenian author, from Slovenian physicists. That is absolutely, you're absolutely right. I'm sorry, I just wanted to be short as possible because then my presentation will be too long. Yeah, you're right. It's closer to first law of thermodynamics, but it's somehow connected to second law of thermodynamics because it is an opposite of entropy, and syntropy does happen.
Yeah. Yes, and within the notion of what I called, even I think it was in the 1990s, I called it third order cybernetics, in which the biochemical work that goes on as a consequence of metabolism follows the first law. That is, the energies associated with metabolism are creative energies that generate new forms, that generate variety, that generate the emergence of new forms. So my question then would come to what is the distinction with the notion of inverse entropy from syntropy?
Well, that stuff. Inverse, I understand what you're talking about because this virus, this coronavirus, his RNA virus, which is very unstable, and something what you just said, it's absolutely applicable, directly applicable to this virus, which is very unpredictable because of the messenger RNA. Inverse, I am saying, maybe, I'm sorry if I don't understand quite your question, although I hope I do. I understand, but inverse, it's something, if system exists and system can collapse, if entropy exists and syntropy exists as well, then cybernetics was never ever recognized as a system. And I think the cybernetic is system as well. Maybe it's a cybernetic it's a system of a higher cybernetics order. But I believe that, if we will stuck with second order cybernetics, then system cybernetics will collapse. I hope this is very intense now. I'm sorry, maybe I'm not that clever. I'm trying.
Well, if I can pursue this line of argument further, then the issue between doing positive work within the holistic part of the organism, now using the Whiteheadian notion of organism, the issue of social responsibility becomes doing, if you would, syntropy, or doing positive work for the community as a whole. Now, the tension that I find in your presentation is the difficulty in the terminology of cybernetics. Command and control implies a level of power, a level of dominance, a level of really, what more can you say? Command and control is a military sort of term that implies a top-down approach to society. The corresponding chemical approach depends on the cooperative relationships within organisms, the cooperative parts of feedback and feed forward. And I'll stop there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Not just feedback, but feed forward. Unfortunately, I am a military person. I'm a colonel of Slovenian army, but that doesn't really matter. I don't have the pathological view of cybernetics. On the contrary, but I believe that, you know, if somebody, cybernetics is somehow like it is always untouchable, but it's definitely not. The cybernetic is also fragile, so that is why with
Jason, may I say something? Sorry, I switched my microphone. Teodora, thank you very much. Parting, very challenging, very interesting. Differences in terminology, which are a bit confusing for people who've been thinking about these things in other terms. I just wanted to make a few comments, if I may. One, the collection of all ecosystems is known as the biosphere. And the biosphere is all the material stuff that gets circulated because we have energy coming into our planet. We also get some extra material from meteorites and so on, but it's one circular system. Now within that we could distinguish specific ecosystems, natural ecosystems, but that's partly the choice of the observer where he puts the boundaries. In principle, in the natural ecosystems, which includes us, everything is connected to everything else. And I don't find the distinction between the natural systems and the digital ecosystems particularly meaningful when we're looking at the whole story. So that was the first thought. The other one, I think I hear what you're saying with respect to entropy, synthropy, and the inverse second law. The other ways of putting it is the entropy is a very unfortunate term. If the creators of that term had just used the word order and disorderliness for the disorderliness for entropy and order for negative entropy, which some people still use, we might all be better off. But the dynamics that you've been talking about depend on you have a system which is under constraint in some way, so it has to respond, but it has energy coming into it. So it's a self-organizing system. Now, Ashby long ago said, you know, basically a loosely coupled system, a self-organizing system, has to become informed of, you know, respond to the constraints on it, the laws that are functioning in its world, otherwise it will perish. And that's our situation now. We have to understand, bit by bit, we've become more aware and understanding of the constraints we face on this planet as part of the whole system. So we're now informing ourselves of the constraint, and now we must respond. And just yesterday, I came across a very interesting term, because Ashby says, you know, we have to learn, we have to adapt or die. And I came across a term yesterday called enabling constraints. There are constraints which enable innovation. They force us to innovate. So we're all agreed. I think we're in that situation. So part of the biosphere, and really that's it. So there are two other terms that get used. One is synergy, where, you know, parts of a system function together to become more than the sum of the parts. There's also something called negative synergy, where the system of usually human beings working together become less than the sum of the parts. But that's just terms. But the broad picture that you're painting is one I think we can all agree with. With respect to the terms first and second order cybernetics, once you go, second order cybernetics introduces concepts of self-reference, reflexivity, and responsibility. Once you start creating structures above that, you've stood back and you've become an observer of systems. You've stopped being reflexive. by all means, there are hierarchies all over the place in cybernetics, hierarchies of control, hierarchies of languages and meta-languages. All these constructions can be made, but you don't have to damn second order cybernetics and say you need these higher orders, because second order cybernetics is the domain of self-reference and responsibility. Other constructions are other constructions.
The expression, Bernard,
Reviewed on their merit.
the expression constraining and enabling.
Excuse
is
me.
from
Thank you.
Giddens.
Excuse me. Thank you, Bernard. I was writing down. I will think about it carefully. Thank you so much. Excuse me.
Very happy.
I just wanted to say to Bernard that it is from Giddens, enabling and constraining. Yes.
Oh, that's good, because there's a book out. I could give you the reference, but I came across it yesterday during a conversation with Paul Pangaro. He'd come across this term. I did a Google, and I discovered there's a book out by one of these kind of, they breed them in America, the kind of free-thinking intellectuals. And the whole book is about systems and enabling constraints, creativity, innovation. No mention of cybernetics, of course, but it's in its essentials, it's telling us a good story, but it's become some kind of bestseller in the States or in the systems world. And it does centrally use this notion of enabling constraint. I've not encountered it before. Thank you, Lute. Thank you.
I wanted to ask something to Moulay. You make such pictures of harmony and small-sized circles as alternatives to the Western style of pollution and bad things and colonialism and whatever. So we have a good world and a bad world. And I was wondering, because if we look back for your country particularly, it's a very interesting case, because Yugoslavia has had the aspiration of being that good world, and these small circles and self-organized self-control in labor. What should we take from that? Or is that to be learned that we shouldn't? Or can you tell us perhaps how you combine your vision, your lingo with that lingo? It sounds for me very much the same as what I heard when I was in Yugoslavia. It's long ago now. It's the same ideas of that there is an alternative. Social responsibility is more or less the same as solidarity.
I want to approach this from another viewpoint. Why is system theory and cybernetics as a science so much younger than the basic sciences? Because we have become important when they have become too specialized to solve the problem without causing many new problems. And that's why system theory is a science of interdisciplinary cooperation. And Wiener, as we know, produced cybernetics from interdisciplinary cooperation. And we should be specialized in interdisciplinary cooperation and making bridges between the sciences. Now, one of the points which Teodora was showing us, somebody was mentioning complex systems. Nothing is around which is not complex. But why do we mix out the word system and the word entity? Because people are still very much under the influence of the narrow specialization, which deals with complex entities as a science and as a practice. So what we need to do, I think, as systems people, is to limit ourselves to interdisciplinary cooperation for synergies. We are a science of synergy. Whatever areas, always between the areas, there are many links between the areas which are not covered by the classical traditional sciences. And all these results about AI and all these which Igor was pointing out, these are results of systemic thinking. Not only thinking, systemic behavior. Thinking is a part of behavior. Theory is a part of thinking. So that's why I speak of systemic behavior as a practical application of system theory and system thinking.
A factual question arises. What is the status of the ISO standard? I think you said it was 2600 with regard to the holistic view of
26,000.
ISO?
ISO 26,000.
26,000, yes. What's the status of it?
26,000. 26000.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
What is the status of it? Is it formally adopted in any situation?
It was formally adopted in 2011, 12/11, close to 10 years ago. But it's not adapted as an obligation, but as an advice.
To who?
Well, mostly to companies. Sorry, I'm having a phone call right now. Somebody's. Yeah, Anita.
May I ask a question afterwards?
Let me mute him. Yeah, go ahead, Jamie.
Yes, you can do that.
I want to ask a question also of Dr. Mulesh, but also Teodora and Igor. It's about Karl Popper's three-world hypothesis. Now, I missed a little bit of the presentation, so if it was discussed, I apologize if I say something that is already mentioned. But it was Bernard Scott who prompted me with his comments about the biosphere. There is also a term that's called the Anthropogenic Mass, which is an element of the biosphere, and that is all the artifacts or the human stuff. And so that gets us back to Karl Popper, who say in our mind it's useful to make a distinction between world one, that is the biosphere, world two is that mystery of consciousness, creativity, and then world three is the human stuff. And I always think of nuclear power plants as the best example of human stuff that may exist after all the humans are dead and may affect and alter the environment in a way that would not have happened without the humans. And so I'm just curious whether that thinking of Popper is diffusing into your conversations, given that I have found a picture in which Karl Popper actually talks a little bit about cybernetics, and I've shared it with Stuart, and I think maybe also with Jason. So that Popper, Karl Popper, maybe just was needed another 100 years to live to develop the connection further with cybernetics. But the idea is to make a very clear distinction between the human element and then the anthropogenic element, and then the natural world. And I'm just curious to hear some feedback on it and to connect it to the presentation of Matthias when he talks about a circle and social responsibility. I see a circle as a structure or a structural metaphor that we use to talk. And so in the adult world, there are lots of circles, like the board of directors. I mean, now a circle is not always working because the circle can be manipulated. But as a structure is trying to give a message to say every point in the circle as the point, as the power to destroy the circle, and as the responsibility to keep the circle together. So the circle, I mean, it's not like, okay, now we're all perfectly collaborating, but it's kind of an orientation device as an alternative to a hierarchy, which is kind of an arrow that clearly says there is something with more power and less power. And I'm using this just as an example of Popper's World 3 thinking, because a circle is technically an artifact, a World 3 element, but the way we use it is to talk about what's going on in World 2 while we're being constrained by World 1. But in general, I'm curious whether there is any thinking just related to the three world hypothesis in Karl Popper in your spheres of influence about systems thinking, and that's both for Igor and Teodora.
Jamie?
Start, Teodora.
Yeah, I will. Jamie, thank you so much. I appreciate your thoughts. I'm taking your comment very seriously. I know about the author you're talking about. And unfortunately, I'm not very. I'm rather. I'm closer to Gregory Bates